All right, today we're tackling one of the biggest questions out there, consciousness, and we're going to do it through a pretty unique lens, the final unpublished manuscript of a truly brilliant thinker as he grappled with this incredible mystery in his last years. Right out of the gate, he frames the whole problem with this perfect analogy. Think about that. We're using the very thing we're trying to understand it. It's like an eye trying to watch itself see. You can't, right? Not directly. Any reflection you manage to get is probably going to be a little bit off, distorted.
So that leads to the central question of the whole thing. What is this thing? This awareness that's even asking the question in the first place. And this isn't some abstract puzzle, It's deeply personal. The awareness you're using right now to listen to me, that's it. That's the mystery. So let's jump in and follow his train of thought.
Okay, so first up, he lays out what he sees as the fundamental puzzle. He calls it the asymmetry of awareness, which is basically this deep imbalance in how we experience reality.
And this slide just lays it out so clearly. Look, my own inner world, my thoughts, my feeling of seeing the color red, my headache, I know that stuff directly. It's the one thing I can be absolutely certain about. But your consciousness? Well, I can only guess. I see you act like you're conscious, and it's a really, really good guess. But at the end of the day, it's still an inference, a hypothesis. I can't feel your headache for you.
And this takes us back to Descartes, right? I think, therefore I am. But our author here, he kind of reframes it to be even more basic. He's saying, forget proving that I exist. The point is that something is happening. A thought is occurring. A feeling is being felt. That raw experience, that's the thing you can't doubt. It's our bedrock, our ground zero for this whole investigation.
All right, so once we've established that starting point, he takes this classic problem of other minds and applies it to, well, one of the biggest things we're all thinking about right now.
AI. This gets us right to the heart of the Turing test, doesn't it? If a machine can act like it's thinking perfectly to the point where you can't tell the difference, does that mean it is thinking? I mean, if behavior is all we have to go on with other people, is it fair to ask for something more from a machine? Is faking it perfectly the same as the real deal? His gut reaction at first is a hard no. And the way he puts it is just fantastic. He says a machine might be like a book. A book can have every single word of Hamlet printed in it, but the book doesn't get it, right? It doesn't feel Hamlet's pain. And he worries that a machine could be just that, a perfect mimic on the outside, but on the inside, nobody's home. The lights are off. But here's what makes this so interesting. He doesn't just stick with his gut feeling. He challenges himself with a thought experiment. Okay, so imagine a giant book that can answer any question. Step 1, it's just a simple lookup table. Kind of dumb. But then, step 2, we add rules to it. Rules for how to transform questions into answers. Then, step 3, we add meta-rules, rules that can change the other rules. And you see where this is going. At what point does this complex rule following suddenly become real understanding? He realizes, man, that line is basically impossible to draw. And that realization forces him to kind of backtrack and question his own assumptions. He starts to think, maybe my definition of mechanism is just too simple, too clockwork. What if we have a system that's so complex it can watch itself work? A system with these intricate feedback loops that allow for self-monitoring. Maybe that's a path towards something that looks a lot like awareness. This shift in his thinking is what leads to really his big idea, the major breakthrough in the manuscript. He says, look, we have to stop thinking about consciousness as a light switch. It's either on or it's off. We need to start seeing it as a spectrum, a dimmer switch. And this is the core of it. We tend to treat consciousness like we treat mass. A thing either has it or it doesn't. A rock doesn't, a person does. He says that's a categorical confusion. We're filing it in the wrong drawer in our minds. It's not a yes or no thing. Instead, he lays out this continuum. He even calls it a democratization of mind, which I love. Think about it. A thermostat has this tiny, tiny bit of intentionality, right? It has a goal, keep the room at a certain temperature, and it acts to achieve it. An insect is way more complex. A dog has an even richer inner life. And then you get all the way up to us, with our ability to think about our own thinking. He argues they're all on the same spectrum, just at vastly different points. It's a difference in complexity, not a different kind of thing altogether. And that leads to a pretty radical conclusion, right? If consciousness is a spectrum based on information processing and self-reference, then the gap between us and the rest of the universe isn't some magical leap. It's a vast, complex, but ultimately continuous slope. So with this new framework in place, the spectrum of consciousness, he reaches the climax of the whole journey. He starts to confront the absolute limits of what anything can know about itself.
And he does this by connecting it to something called Russell's paradox in logic. Now, don't get hung up on the math here. The main takeaway is this. Sometimes, when a system tries to refer to itself, it ties itself into a logical knot it can't escape. And his big idea is, what if consciousness, because it's constantly referring to itself, runs into a similar kind of logical wall?
And this analogy just makes it crystal clear. A camera can take a picture of anything, right? It can even take a picture of itself in a mirror. But what can it do? It can't take a picture of its own internal process of taking the picture. It can't capture the photographing in the photograph. And he thinks consciousness might be just like that. We are aware of things, but we can't quite turn our awareness around to see the act of being aware itself.
And this brings us right to what philosophers today call the hard problem. This is the big one. It's the ultimate why. We can map every neuron, every synapse in the brain. We can understand all the mechanics. But why does any of that feel like something from the inside? Why is there a subjective experience of red or sadness? Why aren't we all just incredibly complex biological computers running all our programs in the dark with no inner life at all?
And this is where he lands, with this really humble conclusion. He suggests that maybe the hard problem isn't a problem we're supposed to solve. Maybe it's not a puzzle at all. Maybe it's just a fundamental limit, a logical boundary that comes with being a self-referencing system. It's a wall we should acknowledge, not something we're meant to break through.
So, wow, if we can never really solve this, if we're stuck with this uncertainty, what do we do? Well, for him, this isn't a reason to give up. Far from it. This profound uncertainty becomes the very foundation for how we should act, for our ethics.
He calls it epistemic humility, which is a fancy way of saying we should be humble about what we can know. Since we can't draw a clear line and say consciousness starts here, since we don't even know if there is a line, the only logical, the only ethical thing to do is to be careful, to err on the side of caution. And this isn't just theory. It gives us a real-world guide for how to act. I mean, the moral calculation is pretty straightforward, right? What's the risk? Well, the harm of treating a conscious being like it's just a machine is catastrophic. It's a huge moral error. But the harm of treating a machine with a little bit of respect, just in case, it's basically zero. So you always are on the side of caution. And this doesn't just apply to how we treat animals. It has massive implications for how we should approach the increasingly sophisticated AI we're building right now. You know, it's funny. After this huge, sprawling intellectual journey, he brings us right back to a very simple, very human place. That feeling of being alone in our own heads, trapped in our own private movie. That's the core of the problem. But it's also the one thing every single one of us shares. We're all alone in exactly the same way. We're alone together. And he thinks that that's something really important.
So in the end, there's no neat solution tied up in a bow. What he leaves us with is more of a responsibility, a charge. He basically says that this thing, this consciousness that we can't even properly define, it's the most precious thing there is. It's the only reason anything matters at all. And our time to experience it is incredibly short. But for the little while that it lasts, it is literally everything. Which kind of leaves us with the real final question, not for him, but for us. If this awareness really is everything, what are we doing with it?